To my far right at the end of the stage is Joe Ovies. He's one half of OG Media LLC in Raleigh, with his partner Joe Giglio, hosting the Ovies and Giglio podcast, covering local college sports rivalries, the Carolina Hurricanes, and other relevant sports topics for local fans in the Triangle market. It's a platform that he built in 2023. The duo has amassed nearly 10,000 followers on YouTube. Ovies co-hosted the OG from 2020 to 2023 with Giglio on 99.9 The Fan, and Raleigh was the co-host of Adam and Joe with Adam Gold for over a decade at more than 2,500 shows on that station. Joe is a 2001 NC State graduate. To my right, Desmond Johnson, the owner of Tobacco Road Sports Radio LLC, an online-based sports talk / live sports format network based here in the Triad market in North Carolina. Tobacco Road Sports Radio includes podcast content from his own Desmond Johnson show to live game coverage of local high school sports, North Carolina A&T athletics as well. Desmond has experience in the traditional radio space with WSJS from 2016 to 2019, as well as an extensive background in advertising and digital marketing. He's a 2003 UNC Greensboro graduate working in radio there at WUAG. So guys, I want to get started with this concept, independent versus traditional media. What are the pros? What are the cons of being in each space? And Joe, we can start with you there.
Well, I was going to say, having a steady paycheck is definitely a pro working for a traditional sports outlet. It's interesting in my side of the business, on the radio side of the business, they say that your career doesn't actually get started until you've been fired. This is the way it goes. And for 25 years, I thought I had started my career. Turns out, no. It started in 2023 when, through some budget cuts, they let our show go, and we were forced to go independent. I'll say this though. I've been sitting in all the panels today and hearing questions from people who've been sticking with it throughout. And there's been a lot of uncertainty about where do I get this job? Who do I latch on with? And things like that. And I think Desmond and I are now in this position at the end, which I think is kind of funny in that, especially during the pay your dues portion of it. In 2025, I'm not quite sure there is such a thing as paying dues because there is no gatekeeping anymore. And I would advise you, if I was coming up, when I was coming up, the whole idea of paying your dues made a lot of sense. I graduated from NC State in 2001. I worked at the college radio station, WKNC, where I was a general manager. I started from the bottom. I literally was working weekends, screening phone calls and doing updates and things like that in 2000, my senior year. I was doing stringer work. I was at Carter Finley Stadium, Keenan, calling into ESPN Radio, AP Radio Network, Sporting News Network, Fox Sports Radio, making sometimes upwards of $250 to $300 on stringer work on a Saturday, right? That's how you paid your dues back then because everybody controlled everything. So if I wanted to talk about sports on the radio, well, I had to go work for a sports talk radio station. You don't have to do that anymore. And there are certain advantages now doing it on your own that will absolutely surpass any sort of media environment in a traditional sense. And I would also caution you that when you do land a job at a traditional media company now, all they're doing is cutting back. We kind of are in a weird environment now where a lot of you are not incentivized to stay in this business anymore. I know of one prominent writer who works for The Athletic that as the trajectory goes, in the old days, he could be up here like Dan Shaughnessy, right? He could be like Rosenthal. But the way that these companies are working now, there's really no incentive for him to stay. But what do? You still love this, right? Now you have every access in the world to do it on your own. The technology is cheap. YouTube is free to start up and go. Podcasts are obviously the way people consume their media now. So I would say not so much be worried about landing the job when you can actually create the job for yourself now. And it's never been easier to do it. That's not to say it's not difficult down the line, but Desmond, you know this, from doing plug-and-play, you can just start it yourself thanks to the technology we have today.
Yeah, and I was going to piggyback off of that with, I graduated in 2003 from UNCG, and the technology that exists now didn't exist then. So the jobs that me and Joe are doing, they didn't technically exist at the time. So it's kind of hard to say this is what we were aiming for. But kind of similar situation as Joe, where I was actually running a sports station here in the Triad, WSJS, and through the budget cuts, they let me go in late 2019. So I always equate everything to pre-COVID, post-COVID. So this was pre-COVID. So it's 2019. I'm thinking I just ran WSJS for the past 3 years or whatnot. I was the creative director. I was doing programming. I was kind of their engineer. I was doing a little bit of everything. And that's actually the first thing of advice I'll get. Never think you are irreplaceable in this business, because you are. There was plenty of times in different spots where I'm like, how could they let me go? Who's going to do the 5, 8 things that I'm doing that no one else in the building does? They'll either not get done, or they'll figure out a way to do it in a cheaper manner. But you're never in a position where you're safe, basically, and that's the biggest con for working in a corporate world. But in a previous life, I worked corporate. I did outside sales for traditional media. I did production. I did on air. I did the program director. I did all those different things. And for me, it kind of took the experience of being let go, not once, but twice, from multiple traditional media outlets in the triad. There were huge outlets. After building something with them, and you're thinking, okay, I'm good to go here. And then the rug gets pulled out from underneath you. That was kind of when I was like, okay, now we need to kind of figure out something to do here where I'm not dependent on that check, because that's what you really start. Even if you have like a bad show, you're still getting paid.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're doing it by yourself, you have a bad show, you might lose advertisers, you might lose listeners, viewers, whatever, just off of that first impression. When I first saw you and came across you on a reel or whatever, I think I want to watch your show. They don't like it, they're not coming back. Whereas if you're on, WRL or The Fan or WSS or whatever, you have a bad segment or whatnot, they know you're going to be there Wednesday. They know you're going to be there Thursday. You're still going to get paid. So it's a different kind of level of fear. We operate on fear, and a good fear, in terms of we have to make sure this stuff's on point, because you're not representing the brand of a Winston-Salem Journal or WSJS. You're representing the brand of Joe Ovies. You're representing OG Triangle Media, Tobacco Road Sports, yourself, me. You're representing you. So when you're out in public, you're having to represent that 24/7, as opposed to when you're working for a corporate thing. So it's a different grind, but I think in the end it's more rewarding, because you're putting more of yourself into it. And when you get fans that come up to you and say, I like your work and that kind of thing, you realize this is what I wanted to do. I'm choosing the path I want to do, as opposed to taking the path that we were kind of told we had to take. And you'll find out a lot of times people like us, we didn't choose this path. It kind of got thrust upon us. We had to kind of figure out what to do. And then post-COVID, it opened up a bunch of things where people realized, after sitting in their houses for 2 years, you could do a lot of stuff sitting in your house. And it opened up the technology. It opened up ways people contacted people in terms of guests. And Zoom got huge. StreamYard got huge because of COVID. And it opened up this whole world where now my studio, I have an adult studio in my home that is actually more advanced than the studios I was using in traditional media radio stations that were running Windows 10, and they were up by Band-Aids, basically. So you see that from the inside, and you're like, I could do that, but I could do it like this and do it like that. And once you have your own control over it, you're the decision maker, and it makes it a little bit easier to kind of plan your day out.
One quick thing I wanted to piggyback on what Desmond said about the job and things like that. I think the smartest thing that has ever been said was by Roy Wood Jr., who was in the running for The Daily Show to host. He didn't get it. And he said something that really resonated with me, in that all these jobs, you don't own them. You rent them. At some point, it's going to go to somebody else. At some point, it's going to go to somebody else. So we've hit a weird point where you are the brand, not ESPN, not the newspaper that doesn't understand how to get circulation up anymore, right? Or the local TV station that is more concerned with putting the weather alert than they are about the 90 seconds they're going to give to a local sports broadcast, a local sports report. You are the brand. Look at ESPN today.
I was just about to say that. Yep.
Pat McAfee, they went to Pat McAfee because they needed him, not the other way around. Pat's going to keep doing what he's doing whether this ESPN thing runs out. ESPN recognized what was happening. And the same thing will continue to go this way with Stephen A. Smith. Why they gave him the money that they gave him is because he could go off and do his own thing now. They need Stephen A. Smith more so now because of the brand itself. Now, is everybody going to go be a Pat McAfee? Is everybody going to go be a Stephen A. Smith? Of course not. But that doesn't mean that you can't create your own local niche version of that brand that makes it work for you.
And that's what traditional media is kind of doing now, in terms of what you were saying. the biggest stars at ESPN are the ones that are brand names that they can market and put on whatever. So Stephen A. Smith is doing a little bit of everything. Pat McAfee, like you said, Mike Greenberg, they've literally built their morning around Mike Greenberg and Stephen A. Smith and gave them a 4-hour block to kind of carry us into lunchtime. Whereas we were younger, that was all Sports Center.
Yeah.
You know, like Stuart Scott and Rich Eisen, who they're bringing back to ESPN, the Rich Eisen show that's on the Roku network, same kind of deal where they're just basically licensing the content and put it on ESPN. So ESPN is starting to see, now they're about to go over the top and start charging subscriber fees directly into their app. They don't have to go through cable networks anymore. They need content. They need people that draw content outside of ESPN to bring that in. What you're saying about Pat's totally right. Pat's got 1 million subscribers. He was doing just fine without. He had to deal with DraftKings or whoever it was.
Yeah.
And ESPN was like, hey, come over here, we'll pay you $1 billion or whatever and do your thing. And he still gets the third hour of his show. It's still just YouTube exclusive. And a lot of people don't even know that. They just watch the 2 hours that are on ESPN. So it goes both ways. And I think the one thing we've probably learned is that we don't trash traditional media because we still use them. Like we're still symbiotic in terms of our relationships. And traditional media is starting to figure out they can use people like us to fill in the content that isn't really there anymore because those traditional reporters aren't there. They didn't go through the same path that the ones older had to, so they're not built from the same cloth, I guess you could say.
But to build a brand, you need to build an audience. And Joe, you guys have nearly 10,000 followers on YouTube alone, 2 years into this. What was the importance of having that built-in audience from traditional media?
Yeah, so this is where things start getting a little, trying not to be hypocritical about these things and understand how, as Tarico was talking about earlier, everybody has their own path to getting to where they get to, okay? For me, I came up at a time that was more traditional. And over time, working in local sports talk radio, I never worked in any other market, but working in local sports talk radio for nearly 25 years, I already had an audience through a traditional network. However, during that time, you used that platform that was dominant at the time to also dabble in platforms that were up and coming. So when I first started out, the reason I got a full-time job is because I begged them to give me a job. And I said, okay, I'll do a blog for you. Okay, think about this. This is how old I am. But blogs were the thing back in 2005. All right. Then, to Desmond's point, you start adding some things to your arsenal. I basically was convinced I stayed employed as long as I did because I was like, all right, well, we should be doing video. We should be doing podcast projects. We should be doing extra content on top of what we're doing on top of the radio to meet people on the platforms that they're currently listening to because they're not listening to the radio. Reason why in 2015 we were the number one listened to show in the market for the demographics that you care about. And the big reason why was because we did well with men 18 to 34. Funny thing happened once we approached COVID. Even this happened before COVID. 18 to 34-year-olds stopped listening to radio. But that doesn't mean 18 to 34-year-olds weren't interested in sports anymore. They were just consuming it in different ways. So I started to get people interacting with me because they saw me on YouTube. Oh, well, the other day I was at Publix and the checkout guy says, hey, man, are you a podcaster? And I'm like, yes. Yeah, I see your stuff on TikTok. So, well, to Matt's point, I built my audience through a traditional medium. You expanded it by getting into where people are and where people are consuming. And now, this gets back to my original point that you can find a hook through YouTube. You can find a hook for podcasting to amass that audience real quick. We actually talked to a guy during the Stanley Cup playoffs. Guy's name is Ryan Ditto Shack. It's by Hot Garbage Sports on YouTube. This guy's got way more followers than us, which is fine. I mean, followers are whatever. But the reason he's able to build it up is because he's this youth hockey coach in Canada that explains hockey at a level that most basic people can understand. Very educational, very useful, and he really amassed this following. And we had him on the podcast, and I was shocked by the amount of people going, oh, the two YouTubers that I watch all the time coming together, right? All of this is to say that because of YouTube, because of the algorithm, you can find that hook now and amass an audience really quick if you're consistent with it.
Desmond, your experience going from WSJS, a prominent station in this market, to going independent in this market?
So I had a little bit of a different path than Joe. He had been on terrestrial radio for 20 plus years. So when he moved into a different landscape, like he said, people were kind of waiting for them to start dropping content because they wanted that, they wanted that content. With me, I was running this WSGS for about 3 years, and I had kind of came in where people kind of knew my name in the triad already because I had dabbled in some other stuff with sports. I'd done play-by-play for high school football for WSJS. A couple years prior, I'd bought a brand, sportscarolinamonthly.com, that I wrote for like 10 years freelance prior, and the owner sold it. It used to be like a print magazine that they would leave for free, like all around the triad, and it would cover local sports. So it's kind of like the precursor to Tobacco Road, where it was more hyper local, where they're interviewing the high school 5-star baseball player, or the number one quarterback in the country for high school football is right down the street at Grimsley High School in Faison, Brandon. Like that kind of stuff is right here underneath us. And it got to a point for me after I left SJS. If I saw that Joe mentioned this earlier, the media was contracting in terms of letting go a lot of talented writers and producers and just people who are in the business. The business was getting smaller. So when I left, the people that would be there weren't there. And I'm seeing them lay off guys like Ed Harden, who's like a billion-time sports writer of the year of North Carolina here, and just other guys that have been in the industry for a while. And what it did was it created a gap of local sports reporting in the area that I was. And in the area that I'm in, there's 1 million people between Greensboro, Winston-Sale, and High Point, just right here. So you kind of have to figure out, there's this lure of wanting to get as many followers as possible, as many views as possible, and that kind of thing. I look at it more like, would you rather fish in a big ocean and there's a bunch of fish out there and you might catch a fish? Or would you rather fish in a pond where all the fish want your bait? Like, which would you rather do? And once you get to that point, you start to aggregate the numbers, because you might have had X amount of people on YouTube that watch your show, but then you might have had 2,000 people to watch it on Facebook or on TikTok or on Instagram or Twitter or wherever. And I think in the beginning, I underestimated how many people it was reaching in terms of Tobacco Road as a whole for everything that we do, because people will come up to me and say, hey, I saw you on this or saw you on that. And half the time I didn't even realize we were on one of those things doing a clip or whatever. So it gets to a point where the more organic it is, the more accessible it is for the public. And then the public starts to feel involved in the show too. And once that starts to happen, they start to promote it for you. So it kind of gets to a point where it's nothing is overnight. Like, and Joe was on terrestrial for 20 plus years. I had to basically succeed and fail at multiple stops along the way and learn things along the way to be able to do this. Like, I wouldn't be here if SJS hadn't laid me off in 2019. Like, Tobacco Road wouldn't exist. I'd probably still be working for them. But because that happened, that was the best thing that happened to me. It was a culmination of things. It wasn't just that one event that sparked Tobacco Road. It was, oh, you can do this, you can do that, you can do this, you can do that. Let's just do it. And if it fails, you can go back to radio or whatever, but at least give it a shot and see what happens. And here we are, 5+ years into it and growing.
Desmond said something really, really important about where you're fishing. You see this on the national level, and I'm sure you've all been frustrated by this, where you think something that's important to your area is happening. Well, ESPN will talk about it. We were growing up, getting a mention on SportsCenter was the biggest thing possible. Showed up on the top 10, or like, oh my goodness, we've made it. Now, because of the way the market is and the business of sports and trying to maximize those investments on Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee and spending the amount of money they've done on the NFL, they will shoehorn an NFL topic every single day. Every single day. And you know your audience better than they do. And that's the one thing you have to have ultimate confidence in, to trust your understanding of where you're looking and what your audience or your community is going to do. So when the Carolina Hurricanes are on the Stanley Cup run, make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, and all ESPN is talking about is the Rangers or the Capitals, well, there's a thirsty audience that wants to hear about their team. Who's going to give it to them? You are. Same thing with NC State. When NC State went on their incredible ACC championship run and then off to the Final Four, they were not talking about it other than a novelty of like, hey, here's DJ Burns. Well, how many times we're going to hear about the DJ Burns story? People want to talk about the game. They also want to hear the historical context of why this is such a big deal and bringing in old timers to talk about how this has brought NC State together. That's only something you can do on a local level that the national audience or the national media is never going to be able to do. And to Desmond's point, you might not get those massive numbers, but you've made that audience, that community really, really happy, and they're going to stick with you going forward. That retention matters to me. The retention matters more than anything else in this. Now that we're on this side of the business, audience retention keeps you motivated going forward.
And once you do that too, going off of that, you have the ability, if you're the one that's in the local area and you're realizing that hole is there, that coverage isn't there, going back to traditional media, the people that I've found that are most willing to come on, that are the most knowledgeable guests possible, are sports writers.
Yeah.
Like they want a reason for people to come read their articles online or in print or whatever it may be. So what's the best way to do that? Let me hop on this podcast, let me hop on this radio show, let me talk about the stuff that I actually write about. And once you kind of figured that out, the thing for me was the guest quality had to be a certain level. It couldn't just be just podcasters that are coming on with me. Because I'm the type where I know Mike Tirico was stuck here saying practice talking into a camera, your phone or whatnot. I hate being on camera by myself. Like, I hate it. I hate the one shot format where I'm just kind of ranting about something going on in sports to the camera and that's it. I always have someone with me, like someone to bounce off of. Where it's just easier. I think the conversation's better. Questions come out differently than if you were doing it by yourself. And for that kind of thing, like with the Hurricanes, you have people in the area that are knowledgeable in the Hurricane. David Glenn was the largest syndicated radio show in North Carolina history. He was on so many stations across the state, and he got let go. So, like, that's one of those things where you can't depend on that forever. Now he's got one of the fastest YouTube channels, one of the fastest growing YouTube channels anywhere. Like, I think they're crossing over 35,000. They've only been up for like a year and a half or something because the audience went with him. Like, they had been with them every day in their car, and then when that's gone, you kind of miss putting on that same pair of shoes. So, like, once they started putting that back out again, that audience went with him. Is it as big as the one he had when he was in every radio station in the state? No, but it'll probably reach more people over time. You do more stuff with that content because of the technology now. When he started, in 2001 or wherever it may be. So it's a different time, and it's actually a really good time to be coming out of school, in my opinion, because you have so many different options. You don't have to just depend on the traditional path. You can forge your own if you want, but just keep in mind that that's not a quick path. It's not a quick path to this. You have to kind of build those relationships with advertisers and guests and athletes and coaches and ADs, and they have to kind of know you and trust you before they just turn over this content to you because they don't want to get burned either. So it's a give and take, but it takes some time, but it's definitely doable. And you're seeing it now in the landscape where a lot of places, or a lot of people, I should say, are starting to turn towards, well, let me just do this myself. Even if I'm working for a traditional media outlet, I need this avenue over here to do this too. In case this gets yanked out from underneath me, I've got this over here to do it as well. So it's something you can kind of do to build your own brand while you're doing the traditional stuff and learning how to do this to make that part better and easier for you.
Joe, what was your first aha moment that this was going to work after you went independent?
Ooh. Excuse me.
You go check that.
I was going to say you got me all for clunky. Wrong pipe situation. Desmond, how about you?
Okay.
You're on. Well, I catch myself here. Grab something to drink real quick.
Two, actually. One of the things I first did when I left, when I parted ways with WSGS, one of the first things I did was go to LinkedIn and look for something to keep going. And there was this little company in California that was looking for podcast hosts for a national podcast called Believe. And I'd never heard of them before. And I was like, what is this? And I went in, interviewed with them, and they hired me. I actually was one of their first podcast hosts when they first started 5+ years ago. And they brought me on board to host the Carolina Panther podcast that they were going to do. It's called Believe in Panthers. And the first year, they paired me with Tyrone Poole, who was the first draft selection in Carolina Panthers history. We did 1 year. After that, he left, and I brought on Skylar Callahan, who I'd become acquaintances with, who is the beat writer and publisher for the Panthers for Sports Illustrated online. So he was like the inside. And then Believe, at that point, they've been around for like 2 or 3 years. And they're like, we're going to put an NFL player, us was going to be Thomas Davis. And we had met with Thomas Davis. We interviewed with him and everything. The rapport was good. Met with his agent and everything. A week went by, and then we found out that NFL Network had snatched him up for extra work, and he was no longer going to be our host. And Believe was like, oh, we've got a backup. A week later, it was Jonathan Stewart. And since then, it's been myself, Jonathan Stewart, and Skylar Callahan. For the past, I've been on it for how many years? When was the last time the Panthers had a winning season? I started after that.
2017 was the last
So I
playoff year.
started 2019. So I've been the host for Believe in Panthers for this will be my 6th season doing it. And we have yet to have a winning season. So, yeah, I know. I think I'm jinxing it or something. Yeah. But it's like, it's one of these things where maybe this is the year. Maybe this is the year. And like I was, I think it was on Walmart or something. And somebody came up to me and started talking about Believe in Panthers. And this is after we'd been on for a year or two. And he was like, yeah, your show was great. Well, I was sitting there waiting and everything. I was like, waiting? What are you talking about? He was like, yeah, I saw it in the airport. It was on the airport thing. And I didn't realize that Believe had started sending out certain shows to like LAX and like these big airports. So they're like sitting there like playing like while you're waiting on your flight. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize my face is on all these different places. So that was one of the first ones. But for Tobacco Road, the live broadcast, we probably do more live sports broadcasts than anyone on the Triad. We're very heavy in the high school game. I did a stint at Learfield. I was the producer for Charlotte back in 2017 when Charlotte's football team went 1-10 and their basketball team went like 5-27. It was horrible. Like just sitting there knowing they were getting blasted by 60 every Saturday or whatever, and you got to sit there for 5 hours and produce the show. But if you're not familiar with Learfield, they do all the college stuff. And I was like, this is a great idea because you have an individual producer and you have a team on site calling the game and everything else. And it's college. And I was like, you did this on the high school level. And I was like, okay, do it on the high school level, but you can't do it with every high school. Go to a high school that's got 500 kids. You can't do it with a high school that doesn't have a strong alumni base. You can't do it with a high school that their athletics are like here one year and then down here the next year. Like it has to be schools that are good in multiple sports every year. And I tended to go towards the bigger schools. And in 2021, post-COVID, when the high schools here in North Carolina during COVID, while everyone was out for like a year and a half, they had the NFHS network. They had a contract with them where they came in and installed cameras and all of the football fields and all the basketball arenas for every high school in the state. And with those, there's a camera. It moves with the motion of the ball, but there's no audio. So it's like watching a security camera when you're watching the game. It's just doing like this back and forth. And we had kind of figured out over time how to patch in our audio into their hard drive, and it just syncs up to it. So our radio broadcast is now syncing up to NFHS. We realized, oh, more people are hearing us over here than they are on the traditional radio that we're actually sending the content out to. In the spring of 2021, High School, my alma mater, that I call High School Forum Fridays, softball team had made it to the 4A state final. And they were playing Wilmington-Hoggard. And it was at North Davidson. And there was no NFHS camera. So the rules in North Carolina for high school, you can't shoot stuff, do whatever without, especially state championships. You have to pay a fee to the High School Athletic Association. You have to get these hoops and whatnot. And there was a guy in the crowd shooting the game with an iPad. And he had put the link out on Facebook or something. And he was sitting there shooting it, and he got caught, obviously, like at the first inning or whatever. They boot him out. So everybody that was on his feed, what happened to the feed? What happened to the feed? And bless it, I don't know whose soul it was, but somebody posted the Tobacco Road link because we were already there calling the game on audio. And I'm sitting there in the field, and my guy's doing the game. I'm just producing. I'm not even calling it. I'm sitting there watching it as we're doing it. It's like third inning, fourth inning, and I see the numbers starting to just kind of tick like up. Like it goes from 50 people listening to 100 to 300 to 800 to 1,000. I was like, what is going on? Like, what is happening? And by the time we finished that game, I think we had like 5,000 people like streaming that game at the same time, which is to this day the largest streaming event that we've done in terms of a one-time just audio only type event. And it was for girls softball, the 4A state final between East Forsyth and Wilmington-Hoggard. And when that happened, when it was over, we were sort of looking at the numbers, and I'm just like, this actually could work. Like there's something here. Like there's something here that people aren't getting from traditional media. And that, for me, that was the real aha moment. I was like, oh, okay, this is something that no one else is thinking about doing. No one else has really tried to do it. Traditional media doesn't have the money to really pour into that kind of thing for a long period of time. And I can easily find folks that are willing to do this because it's usually I go out and find people like you, like coming straight out of college to do play-by-play or color or whatever it is, pods or whatnot, to get your feet wet, knowing that 2-3 years from now, you're going to move on to something bigger than where we are, but knowing that we kind of helped you get your feet wet along the way, and you're not just interning or doing whatever. You're getting that play-by-play experience on a live, live bullets flying, like you're calling radio. It's a big deal. So you get all that too. That was my aha moment, was that softball game. There was softball that ended up being the largest that we had streamed up to that point.
I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of the aha moment. There are no new ideas. There's only new platforms. And to Desmond's point, we've hit a point with traditional media as they continue to cut back on personnel, budget, and everything else. And they're essentially getting by on, well, it's good enough. It's good enough. It's good enough. And they've forgotten about some basic stuff that fans like. So when I say there are no new ideas, just new platforms, where we really had the aha moment was going back to that NC State ACC tournament run and Final Four run. There's no such thing as a post-game call show anymore on radio. When I was growing up, my dad was a Miami Hurricanes fan, Miami Dolphins fan. I grew up in South Florida. When the game was over, people would flip it over to 610 WIOD or 560 QAM, whichever station had it. And you'd listen to people going, can't believe Dan Marino threw that pick, right? We got away from that. Not that there's not post-game shows, but post-game shows today, especially on the radio side, they say, all right, here's what happened. Here's some highlights. Thanks to sponsors. Out they go. They're done in about 15 minutes. On television, I couldn't tell you the last time I saw like a traditional post-game show, right? I know Wes Durham's in the back there. I'm not trying to call out the ACC network or ESPN, but when a game ends on the ACC network, what usually happens? You might see Wes talking to somebody from, an interview or something like that, but not talking about the game, right? It just happened, okay? And people want to talk about it. So, okay, well, what if we fired up YouTube, went live, gave people a phone number to call in, leave voice, and because it's not on radio, if you want to drop some F-bombs, you can drop some F-bombs, man. Do your thing. You want to leave comments live on YouTube, we can read them? Cool, so be it. So that was the aha moment. I'm like, well, wait a minute. All we're doing is post-game radio, just on new platforms. And people ate it up. And it made me realize, oh, that's right. We don't really do that anymore. So if you take anything from this conversation and going on your own, don't be afraid to take things that you associate as old traditional media stuff. It's just not getting done on the platforms that people are consuming now. That's the thing that matters. They're not listening to radio anymore, but they are watching YouTube. In fact, driving in today, I was listening to an industry podcast that was discussing how YouTube on television, not your app, on your phone, not on your laptop, on television, your actual traditional television, it's up to 12% of TV consumption now. That's a lot. That is a lot. So you take advantage of those platforms, and that's how you make your mark and start carving out your own niche.
I was about to say, I'm pretty sure my kids are probably sitting in my living room watching a Minecraft video on YouTube right now on the TV. Just real quick, because I know you're going to get the questions, but off of what you just said in terms of the content doesn't usually change, but the platform does. One of the things that Tobacco Road does, besides like podcasts, again, we do a lot of sports stuff. We're the audio partner for North Carolina A&T Athletics. So we do the radio broadcast, the production aspect of it for basketball. And we started doing this 2 years ago where we saw that same thing. I'm starting to see why Dave put us together on this panel, because it's the same similar type of thing at A&T. We were like, we want to do something post-game, but something different, just the traditional, the guys are just sitting there in the booth talking about what happened or whatever else. And we're like, why don't we use StreamYard and go off of radio for the post-game and do an interactive post-game show where the A&T fans, who A&T is the largest historically black university on the planet. They're very proud of that. Their alumni base is very, very devoted to their team. So A&T's been on a little rough patch with football the past couple of years. And right after they came off their peak, and like it went from here to here, like really fast. So the alumni base is kind of like, what are we doing? Well, they don't say it in those words. They throw the F-bombs and everything out there. Like, what are we doing? This isn't Aggie football, blah, blah, blah. But we gave them a place where you've got that window where Donald Ware and the others are talking about what they just saw in the game, but they can actually read the comments coming in live and actually people can ask questions and they can answer them live post game after the game. Like, what are we doing on defense? Like, what is this? What is that? Why is that happening? Why haven't they fired him yet? Like all this stuff. And it kind of puts Don in a weird spot because you can't go too deep into why they sucked up the place yesterday or what it is. But he can kind of answer the question they feel acknowledged, whereas you didn't get that before. Well, you did get it before, but it went away. At Joe's point, yeah. So that kind of stuff. Think about things that actually worked in the past. They probably will work in the future too. You just got to kind of figure out, okay, traditional radio is not quite a place for it, but can it work on YouTube? Can it work over here? Can I do it on Facebook? That kind of thing. And I think that's the stuff we started figuring out, that you can kind of bring some stuff back and it'll appeal to more audiences.
I want to open it up here to questions for folks in the room. We'll start with Christian here on the aisle.
Football, basketball, baseball, softball. As somebody that kind of just runs all aspects of it, I know like numbers and listeners and stuff is one way when you go to advertise, it's like, hey, here's what we got. But what is also kind of the selling point where they're used to like newspapers and local radio stations coming in, where some of the business owners will question it, I guess, of some of the new platforms when it comes to that thing.
So that's one of the reasons why I still lean on traditional media for high school football, because while radio may be kind of shrinking, live sports in general is still going to be there. Like, because you can tape it, of course, but you know how that goes. You tape it, someone's going to tell you the score before you get home, that kind of thing. So more often than not, live sports are still a viable place to go. In high school sports in particular, you're dealing with a very niche audience, so to speak. So you're not really necessarily selling numbers, you're really selling nostalgia. Because I'm usually going to like East Forsyth, for example, I'll usually go to alumni or people that have businesses in Kernersville. And I always joke, I can throw in Kernersville and hit a business and find somebody that wants to advertise on East Forsyth football because they're good every year. They've won 10 games the past 5 years plus. They're always a top 4, top 5 team ranked. They're always a contender. And last year they had Bryce Baker at quarterback. He's at Carolina now. So there's a lot of eyeballs on them. And we use that to our advantage. So they know that I have that relationship with that school. If they want to get in with that relationship too, they can kind of piggyback off the tobacco road and get in that way. In high school, you can do it that way. Usually, right now we have three active networks, and I think we're about to bring in a couple more. We have East Forsyth, Grimsley, Glenn High School, and a couple more coming in. East Forsyth and Grimsley are the two biggest ones we have by far, and I did that on purpose. I didn't want smaller schools. I want the best schools. I don't listen to a high school football game on Friday where it's Team A versus Team B. Both schools are 300 kids each. You don't know anybody. It's just not a good game. I want to hear the 4-star, 5-star kids that are going to go to Wake Forest or Carolina or Duke or State or whatever. I want to hear them playing against other kids going to Wake. I want to hear the big game. So our philosophy was to do it that way and make it. Let's find the big schools, get in with them, and then we can go back to terrestrial radio and say, hey, we are in with them for every game, home and away. Do you want this package? So like we kind of went around. We went in reverse kind of. Instead of going to the radio station saying, hey, we want to do this, and then going to find the games in the schools. We got in those in the schools early, went back to terrestrial radio, said, hey, we have content. Do you want to pay for it? Like that kind of thing. So that kind of stuff is kind of learning as you go. But again, I wouldn't have known that unless I actually worked in terrestrial radio beforehand. Like I had to see it from that side and know they needed the content. And they would realize, oh, we don't have to do anything but push a button on our end. They're doing everything on site. So that was kind of the vein with it. But that's kind of our biggest thing in the fall is high school stuff. So it's been pretty good.
Numbers are overrated.
Yeah.
Straight up. Numbers are overrated. They can be inflated. They can be fake. We're actually getting to a point where you see influencers with over 1 million followers on Instagram, and they might show up to something and 3 people show up. This is something we deal with as a podcast because it's cheaper to go and get some. We'll use a restaurant as an example. We have a lot of restaurants that advertise on the podcast, and they can go out and get some food influencer that's got 50,000 followers on Instagram. They'll get a bunch of likes and like, oh, we're going to do this. How many of those people will actually show up to your restaurant?
Conversion.
It's easy to throw a like. That's nothing. Can I get you to show up to the restaurant? So how we talk to advertisers is we have an audience. We have a community. We might have only, on average, 5,000 people that listen to the podcast. But of those 5,000 people, we're going to get a good chunk of them that are going to show to your place. And not only are they going to show up to your place, but they're going to put it on social media. Joe and Joe do not miss on their food recommendations. They did it again. Boom, they put it out there. So that's that's the thing that you kind of have to, it's easy to say, it's harder to do, to dislodge yourself from chasing numbers. And it's more important to focus on a community and presenting that community to prospective advertisers. If you can sell that, then you'll be fine.
You'll know if your stuff is reaching or not just when you go grocery shopping or whatever in that area and people are coming up to you asking football questions all the time and whatnot. Like, you kind of get a general idea that it's reaching further than what that number said on that one platform. I agree with Joe. Yeah,
I can buy followers right now.
Yeah, we bought 10,000 followers.
Seriously,
right now.
I could go on YouTube right now and I can pay $50 and goose the numbers.
But in the end,
but what are you getting out of that?
Yeah, it's really helpful.
So it doesn't help me understand what's working, what's not. It's faking it. So it's there though, and that's, a lot of these platforms, they incentivize it. Every time I post a reel that's advertising something about we're going to be on location somewhere, they know, and they'll suppress it. So that's I'll just go ahead and say this right now. For as cheap as everything is, in terms of technology, microphones, getting on YouTube, all that stuff, the most expensive part of all of this is customer acquisition, audience acquisition, because the platforms make it so that you have to pay to play. If you can break through and be okay with getting a TikTok or a video that only does 1,000 views that's one day, but you keep plugging away, it'll eventually pay off without having to pay for it. And you'll get a better sense of what your actual audience is rather than this vanity metric of a follower count.
All right.
So obviously, Joe, I'm a little more aware of how you got where you are now. Desmond, you spoke about you didn't necessarily make the choice to go into the DIY portion of this. Now that you have both been doing it for a while and are seeing success, are you thinking about more different DIY things you could do, or have you guys found your lane, your niche, and like Joe said, have you started your career now that you've been fine?
Yeah. It's, once you get to a point where you're not punching a clock for someone, it gets really hard to think about going back and punching a clock for somebody, especially if you found success doing whatever on your own. Me and my wife Jennifer sit back and one of my biggest supporters, and we talk about this all the time, where it's like, it's very gratifying to have an idea and then execute the idea the way you had it in your head, and then it actually works. You can pay your power, you can pay a water bill, you can pay your car payment, like off of just basically talking sports basically throughout the day. Like, it's wild. Like, I sit back and I'm like, it's crazy that I'm able to build a career off of this, where it's just me giving my opinion on sports, or it's just me giving A&T Athletics the triad, or we're the production partner for the Charlotte Hornets. The Charlotte Hornets radio network runs through Tobacco Road here in the Triangle, or excuse me, in the Triad. And because of that, no one else has it, because you can't have it within a certain radius of someplace else. I recognize that working at SJS, that we had it there, I brought it there, and then they dropped it. They didn't want it anymore because the Hornets sucked. And I'm like, that's cool and all, but they're still a pro NBA team. They're not going to suck forever. Like, and so when I left, it was like, I know, maybe. They did okay in the draft. They did okay in the draft. Right, exactly. So either way, I'm like, okay, that's cool. If they don't want it, someone will. And eventually, when the day comes when they're good, we'll already have the rights to it because we've had it for 5 years or whatever. So, and by doing that, you build relationships with the Hornets and the people backstage with them and their players and their coaches and stuff. So there was a bit of planning to it, but I didn't plan for Tobacco Road to grow into what it is. But I did start to have thoughts about doing something more hyper local before I left WSJS, because I was seeing the whole start to create. And one of the final straws, me and Joe were talking about earlier when we first got here, they laid off so many people in the area. A lot of them just retired. They didn't do anything else. So it just left this huge hole that was just sitting there. Nobody wanted to fill it. Or not wanted to fill it. Nobody tried to fill it. And for me, that's kind of how it started. So it wasn't really I didn't plan this. I stumbled into it. It was more of a series of successes and failures that led to me finally not snapping, but just like, you know what? If someone's going to fire me next time, it's going to be me. Let's see what this works this way. And that's how it's been. So.
Final question. Let's go right here in the middle, second row.
You guys earlier, you guys mentioned how the audience, retaining an audience, come back time after time again.
Consistency. One of the biggest hurdles that you will have is getting discouraged by the lack of traction that you might feel. But the funny thing about podcasting is that there's any number of stats out there that show you a bunch of people start podcasts. And we saw a lot of them in the pandemic because people had nothing else to do, and a lot of them quit. So you got to keep doing it. Just keep showing up, be consistent, come out with a consistent release schedule. If it's every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you do it every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If you're not going to be doing it that week, you got to let people know you're not doing it that week. You have to kind of strip away this layer that I was guilty of when I worked in traditional media, and a lot of folks in traditional media find themselves in that there's this layer between you and everybody else because you're the professional, so to speak, right? What ends up happening is the retention comes in the form of you speaking to this audience like you actually know them, that they're part of your routine. And once they've established you as part of their routine, then you have to reward them with the consistent effort and also sound like you want to be there. One thing that I've noticed as I've listened to more and more podcasts is that you can kind of tell some people who are just doing this because they don't know what else to do. They don't have a passion for it. They're just like, well, I guess I'll just do this, right? There's not a passion for it, or they're over topics. That person that's listening is not over this particular team. They want you to feel as passionate or be as excited about sports as much. And I've actually noticed that a trend here lately in that, you sometimes wonder if people actually like the sports that they're watching. I see this in the NBA all the time. I mean, I'm watching for as much as the TNT show gets lauded for what it is, sometimes I watch it and I think to myself, do you like this sport? So audience can figure that out. So the retention comes in the form of like, man, I'm hype about this, and these guys are probably hype about this too. And as long as you keep that energy, the people will continue to listen to you.
The number one thing I would give advice, for this, be authentic. Don't try to emulate someone you've seen on TV or radio. I see so many younger kids coming out of college. They want to be the next Colin Cowherd, or they want to be the next Stephen A. Smith, or whatever. So they try to do their calls that way, or through play-by-play, they try to emulate someone like that. You have to find your own voice so you're unique, so people will come search for you, as opposed to, I want to find that guy that sounds like Stephen A. Smith that has a podcast on Mondays or Wednesdays. I've had people come up to me and tell me that one of the appeals for Tobacco Road is that the shows I do and the shows we select to have on as podcasts, and even our play-by-play calls, we try to do them in a manner where we're not calling it as if we're talking to the 40-year-old dad that's watching his son play. We're talking to his mother. We're talking to the grandmother that's in Florida trying to listen to the game and maybe not even know what's going on football-wise. We try to call it in a manner where it's down the middle. But we're calling it kind of, I don't want to say like in elementary terms, but we tone it down a little bit in terms of the jargon and everything else, and try to just try to paint the picture on radio. Like, what are you seeing? And Mike Tirico made an excellent point when they were up here before. The color commentator is really the star, like in play-by-play. He's the one that, I'm the straight man. I do the call. My color analyst, more often than not, is the person I pick. I'm very, very comfortable with off of the mic because we can riff off each other, like we know each other very well. The guy that does it with me on Friday nights, we've done it now for 7+ years. And we don't even have to talk to each other until we get to the booth. We already know what we're going to do. It's a give and take. And you have to surround yourself with people like that too. One of the things I've also learned, always try to find people to be on your shows that are smarter than you, that know the stuff better than you do. And always be willing to listen to them and accept what they're saying. We have a thing with David Glenn, who I mentioned earlier. He's on our show, or my show, every other week. So I rotate him out every other Tuesday. And I save all the legal jargon for him, all the ACC stuff for him, because I know that's what people they want to hear that from him, because they know he was a lawyer, and he knows, like, when Florida State and Clemson are trying to leave the league, they don't want to hear my opinion on it. They want to hear, can they actually pull this off? Like, can they legally do this? So instead of me sitting there for 20 minutes by myself, just talking to a camera, like, I don't think they can do it because of blah, blah, blah. I go grab DG, like, okay, DG, tell them why Florida State can't do this or Clemson can't do that, or maybe they can, and it gives them a platform to do that, and it's all symbiotic. Like, find people that are smarter than you, find people that are doing the same stuff you're doing, and work with them, because you can build your audience organically. You're talking about getting around the pay-to-play type thing. I kind of get around that by basically organically bringing on folks, and we're going to try to start doing stuff this fall, but I was already using stuff from people from their network as they began, because I already had a relationship with them before the network began. So they would come on Tobacco Road and, vice versa. And you start getting cross promoted through other platforms that are doing similar things to you, but you're not in competition with each other. That was the number one thing I had to learn going in. Not everybody doing a podcast on the Panthers is competition to me. If anything, we're all one big family, all trying to reach the same people. It's not like a person will just listen to one Panther podcast and like, I'm out, I don't need any more for the week, I'm good to go. They're going to listen to the good ones. And if you can actually promote and help others do the same thing, they'll do that for you. And that's the organic thing. Facebook is the worst when it comes to suppressing stuff when you're trying to put it out organically. The one thing I've learned to do, instead of having to pay to get posts to go, I'll go in and based on whatever it is that I know I'm going to talk about, because I'm only going to talk about stuff that I feel comfortable talking about, whether it's NFL, NBA, college basketball, college football. I don't do any baseball. I don't watch hockey. I don't watch NASCAR. So I'm not even on during the summer. Like it's like my 2 months where I'm off. But on Facebook, a couple years, well, it's been a while now, they started Facebook groups. And they did that specifically so you could go into places where people that were like-minded as you could trade recipes or whatever. And I realized, well, there's a billion Panther groups on here. I'm just going to join every one I possibly can. And then whenever I drop a video on Tobacco Road's site, I'm going to dump it into all these groups. And you have to do it in a way where Facebook doesn't, yeah, if you do it too fast, like, whoa, but slow down. You just showed me like 20 groups. Like, what are you doing? Like, we can't do that here. But sometimes you can kind of trick it if you do it slow enough and just send 10 here, 15 minutes, send 10 here. Like, and now you're in a spot. The Carolina Panthers Facebook group has 80,000 people in it. So like, if I drop a video of Believe in Panthers with me and Jonathan Stewart on it, some of those people are gonna stop and watch it. So like, our Facebook views are bigger than anything else we have, because I kind of figured out if I'm dropping a Charlotte Hornets story on our website, I can drop it in the 15 Charlotte Hornet groups that are on Facebook and not pay for it. And they can't suppress it because if the group didn't deny it, it's just there. It's just sitting there. So if you scroll through, you're going to see it. It's little tricks like that you have to kind of learn on your own. But that kind of thing, you can kind of get around some of that stuff on social media. But in the end, like Joe said, numbers aren't really that important. They're good to kind of get a gauge if you're growing. But don't be upset if, like, you're doing it for the first couple of months and you're only getting 20, 30 people listening. The Believe in Panthers podcast didn't take off really till like year 3. So it takes time to kind of build it. And just believe in yourself. Like, if you're confident enough in whatever you're talking about, the fan base will follow you. It's the ones that are trying to imitate someone else or trying to talk about a topic that they clearly know nothing about. Most people are going to give you that first impression and then they're going to go someplace else and not come back to you. So be leery of that. But,
the chances of being the next Mike Tirico are slim.
Yeah.
The chances of being the next Mr. Beast are slim. Somewhere along the lines, we kind of got away from, can I make enough money to live comfortably? Can I make enough money to get through the year, take a couple vacations, and be good with it, and be happy with where I'm at? And if you go on your own with the intention, if you've got that drive to be the next Mr. Beast, more power to you. More power to you. Desmond was talking about this groups and everybody kind of kumbaya. I'm not like that. I'm competitive. I'm too competitive. I want to be.
That's the traditional radio coming out of here.
Maybe. I just want to make sure that at the end of the day, I want to be the show that you cannot wait to hear when it's all said and done.
Oh, don't get me wrong. Yeah, I'm definitely.
There it is.
Yeah,
Come on.
Definitely that.
Come on. But there's limits to that. There's limits. My point here is that as competitive as I can be about, I want to be the show that you listen to after this event in the Triangle happens, I also know there's limits to it. And once you're comfortable with what that limit is, you can focus on that and be kind of happy with where your career's going.
It's good stuff. Good place to wrap up. Thank you so much, Desmond and Joe.
Thanks for the